tell them a little bit about the way we're sort of doing it now. Send out the PowerPoints first, and then going from there.
All right, so this is the second webinar, and basically we're going to cover using imports and masses today, and then Thursday we're going to go over schematic design. So using what we've learned in the masses to create schematic designs. I sent everybody an email today with the PowerPoint because we got to talking last week, and it just seems like it's going to be really boring if we go over a PowerPoint for 45 minutes to an hour and then try to do live examples for 30 minutes. So instead, we kind of give you the PowerPoint where you can go over it in your own time, and then we spend an hour to an hour and a half doing live examples with y'all actually being able to ask questions. And that seems like we're a way that's going to let us learn a lot more and be able to complete a lot more too. And if you don't look at the PowerPoint, it doesn't really matter. The PowerPoint's more of like a simple step-by-step.
It's ready for reference afterwards.
Yeah,
So.
it would be great to look over it just to see what we're going to talk about so you're familiar. But if you don't, it's no big deal because we're going to say exactly what's going on in the PowerPoint with you actually not seeing it. We're going to go over it live, every last thing from now on.
Yeah, it also helps so we have some better questions. You can actually have questions about things beforehand and then ask while we're doing them versus not really knowing anything until after we showed you, and then you don't have questions until next class, so it kind of wastes a lot of time. The voice is echoing. Talk too loud.
The voice is echoing. It shouldn't be echoing.
Here, please.
Okay, I'll calm down a little bit then.
Because you're talking too loud.
I'll back up from the microphone. I don't have to be on it like 50 Cent. But, all right, so basically today we're going to go over just the massing and every last thing you can possibly do with the massing toolbar. So, when you first open Revit, this is the first screen you're going to see. There's two different kinds of masses. You have an in-place mass or a conceptual mass, and we kind of hit on that last class, but we want to show you how to get to them again. So the first one, which is probably the least important, is the in-place mass. We're not really going to cover too much of that, but when you do an in-place mask, you're going to go to Projects, and then Open or New, and that's how you get your in-place mask. It's in your regular project browser. So when you bring it up, it'll look like this, which is the regular Revit project browser. To get to the in-place mask, though, you go to Massing and Site on the tabs. So it's the fourth, fifth one over, and then you're gonna say in-place mask. So you can place that. Don't worry about any of this right now. It's gonna enable you to actually see the mask, because a mask is basically another view. It's almost like saying it's transparent before you actually do something with it. So before you add context to the mask, it can be invisible. So it's going to turn that on automatically.
Oh crap. Not place mask, in place mask.
Yeah. So you're going to just name whatever the mask is. So if you're working on a sketch, you could say it was a sketch or whatever. If you're doing a rough idea, then it's going to become a rough idea, whatever it may be that you're working on. So this goes back to the naming conventions we were talking about. Try to name it something you're going to know what it is at all times. But the reason we want to cover the in-place mask real quick at first is because the in-place mask and conceptual massing tools are a little bit different. All the tools are drawn by lines or squares or polygons or whatever, so you have every tool you'll need right where the mouse is. And then once you actually draw something, so say if we draw a square really quick, you'll have to draw the square or the item first, and then you need to select that square and then say create form. And then if you zoom out to a 3D real quick, you can see that it actually made that form. So there's your form. The issues with the in-place mask are really that it's better for showing context as you're moving along. So if you're editing really small things, like things I use it for would be like bars in a restaurant or quick subdivisions of buildings, something that I don't want to use walls for because it may change. I've used it for railings a lot because you can really easily draw your railings and then make those railings become anything instead of using the boring railing tool. It has probably half the limits put on it when it comes to actually being able to model stuff. So it's going to say, if you made a really complex form, something that's really, really curvy, like a really extreme NURB, it's going to probably say there's an error with it because there's just not physically enough machine behind the project side of Revit when creating these in-place masses. You can do everything else, like the push and pull, the edit lines, most of that's exactly the same, but it is going to limit what you can create. So in most cases, we say use the conceptual mass instead, just because it really bogs down the machine.
Yeah, it's much better when you're doing a larger project to sort of do a conceptual mass versus an in-place mass, because then you can sort of change things as much as you want and then bring it into your project and then turn it into a building, versus trying to work on a complex mass here, where also you can't save when you're working on a mass in a project, versus a conceptual mass where you can save it while you're working and then bring it into your project, versus here where while you're working you can't save the project until you finish that mass. It won't allow you to.
It's because when you're editing a mass in the project, you're in an editing mode. When you're in any editing mode in Revit, whether it be you're creating stairs, railings, a mass, anything, you can't save until you go to the far right check mark and say finish. It's finish stair, finish railing, it's the same finish button applied over and over again, but now you'll be able to save if you save because we just finished that.
This is not really what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go over conceptual massing, which is completely independent of your project. So in order to get to that, if you were in a project and you wanted to start a new conceptual mass, you could go about it this way by going to your R button, selecting new, and then going to conceptual mass, and that will bring up, go to that interface, this interface.
Yeah, just looking at it first glance, you already know that it's completely different. I mean, really simple things like it's already tilted at a 3D. It's already got some reference lines and planes drawn on, which we'll go over a little bit later. This is where you basically want to start any project. This has way more powerful tools behind the editing mode. The thing we get a lot from people that use SketchUp is that you can create anything in SketchUp, but you can't in Revit. But it's actually a complete lie. You can not only create the stuff in Revit that you can in SketchUp, but you can finish the stuff in Revit and actually give it, load, structural bearings, and meaning, and you can't do that in SketchUp. So now that this conceptual mass tool is actually in Revit, I would say there's absolutely no point to really using SketchUp. If teachers are kind of on your case about Revit, just stay in the conceptual mass side for longer, and they can't really fuss about it because it's more of a push-pull interface, kind of like you're sketching. You can change anything at any point in time. So it's a whole lot nicer, I think. I used to not use the conceptual mass tools a lot. I used to just try doing in-place mass, and after this last skyscraper project, it just killed my computer, and my computer is not weak, and it killed it because there just wasn't enough behind the in-place massing. So conceptual masses are definitely where you want to go. Alright, so when you're looking at the conceptual massing tools, they look basically the same as the in-place mass. So I mean, we can still draw a square. We can still place that square in 3D or in plan, wherever it is. That's something new that was actually added recently in Revit, is the ability to draw in 3D. Before, you always had to be, say if you were wanting to draw on level 1, you always had to be in level 1, and now you can just make sure you're referencing level 1. Which is, the references are probably the hardest thing to understand, but once you actually do start working with them, they're really easy, and they can allow you to perform way higher and more detailed tasks. So I mean, it's simple as saying draw a square, and then you're going to make that mass just like before.
Yeah, the way massing works, I mean, it's similar to SketchUp. I mean, nothing against SketchUp. It's a great program, but it works the same way. You sort of start with a sketch, and then you sort of extrude that up into a mass, which is the way I just showed you a few seconds ago. But the way it works is, typically before you can even start drawing, you want to sort of define what reference plane you want to use for your sketch to be on. So you see, it starts here with already a few reference planes. It has a reference plane here, it has a reference plane here for your center points, and it has a level plane here. And these sort of start to control, what you're doing in your project. So if you wanted to do, a mass on this plane, you would click the plane first, and then you would go to your shape or your drawing tools, and you create a shape, and it will draw it on the plane you just selected. And then you would just select that and then say create form, and it would have a cube coming off that side versus the bottom plane.
Yeah, that kind of action applies for anything that has reference in front of it. If it's a reference point, line, plane, whatever it is, if you select it first, it's allowing it to snap to what you selected. So
if you wanted to create a new reference plane or a new reference line, there's also reference points. You would go to, here's your reference points and here's your reference lines and your reference planes. So if you wanted a new plane to reference off of, you would go here, click plane, then you have your same drawing tools, and you would just draw a line wherever you wanted that plane to be. Say you wanted an angled plane, just click and draw it, and now you have an angled plane to draw a reference off of.
yeah, and you can still edit that plane. So I mean, it still has the push and pull ability. So you can make it larger or smaller. If it's in the way, you don't like it, move it around. Go back to plane real quick though, so you can show them the difference between those two buttons. Click plane. All right, so the first one it selects is actual draw the plane, and then the next one that has like a green line and an arrow, that's picking the plane. So if you have a line that you're wanting to put a plane on, then you would actually use that one. So if you've already drawn, say like a CAD drawing, and you wanted to use one of the lines within the CAD drawing or the flat drawing, you could just by using that. You don't have to redraw it. So it becomes more intuitive in 2011. 2010 was just a disaster when it came to this type of thing. But so that's reference plane. The reference planes, there are two faces. You can draw on either one. You don't have to say, all right, I want to use the back face or the front face. You can just simply go in the direction of the plane. So perpendicular to how the plane is, that's how your objects are going to be drawn. The next one would be reference level, which it already has one in it. So there's it can still be moved. It's just a plane laid flat basically, but it's associating itself with a floor plan or a level. So if we wanted to do another one of those, we could. So reference levels act as basically levels that help you control heights or prelim levels. So heights of buildings, reference of buildings.
And typically when I'm starting off a new mass, I'll go ahead and create a couple of levels here. And a quick way to do that would be just to select this level here. If you hold down the control key, it acts as a sort of a copy command. So if you hold down control and then just click and drag this plane up, you'll get a second level, and you can keep repeating the same process. Just hold down the control key, click the edge, and then drag it up again, and you'll have another level. So I'll create maybe just a few levels depending on how tall the building is or how many floors I'm expecting to have in the project.
Yeah, and it's what's cool about this is if you can see, it's naming each level in conjunction with how he's dragging it. So if he dragged a level 4 level and then dragged up from it, it's going to automatically add 1 to the level. And it doesn't just do this if it's named a level. If I said this is floor plan 1 and I named that very first one floor plan 1 or whatever, it should immediately copy floor plan 2 up, floor plan 3 up. I actually haven't tried it in a project like that. So
It makes floor 2.
yeah, so it's really intuitive now. It knows what you're thinking. It's actually helping architects now, not just engineers. So
And the same thing works for planes. You could just copy this one down, control, click, and move it. And you'll have another plane. Control, click, and move another plane. Just to start sort of giving you some guidelines to start to create some more complex forms.
all right, so the next two references, which are probably more valuable when creating forms than the actual reference planes and reference levels, is reference line and reference point. They're drawn basically the same way, you just use a little bit of a different tool. So with reference line, you actually just click the reference tool. And you should be able to draw any type of reference line you want and anywhere you want. So if we go ahead and throw in like a diagonal, I guess, for that, just a diagonal line, just to show. So you would think at first it's just like the reference plane we just drew, but a reference line is only affecting that line in general. And the big difference is if you rotate a little bit, you can actually see that each little blue hashed line that goes in a rectangle is actually multiple reference planes built into that one reference line. So you have two end planes, and then you have two perpendicularly intersecting planes that cross the actual midpoints of the line. So at any point in time, you can call out one of those planes and draw directly on one of those planes. So it's like getting a reference plane and a reference level all in one. It's because it's not calling it a level, but you have a little bit more you can do with it. All right, so the last one is a reference point, and to get the reference point, you would think it would be right there with the other tools, but it's just called point elements, the little circle. Point elements can be placed anywhere. You can place them on reference lines, you can place them in drawings, anything. So if you want to place a line in this document, you just click it, and it's going to start. It immediately highlighted, the main reference plane to that line we just drew, because that's what the object that was selected. But we could select any object before we click that. So you got to get in a habit of, if you're wanting it on a different reference plane, you need to select the plane first before you select the point or the line that you're trying to draw on it. So now that there's a reference point on this plane, you actually have another plane you've added to this line. So this is where stuff like sweeps would come in. If you're trying to sweep like a Boolean nose over a project, or you're trying to sweep a rail, this is what you would use, or the line. But the cool thing about reference points is you can place them like arbitrarily on a plane, and if that plane or the line curves and you want it to curve and you want the sweep to follow between every one of those points, you can do that. Or if you want the sweep to change as it is being swept. That's actually a loft, but we'll get into that a little bit better. Once you start looking at the PowerPoint, y'all's PowerPoints are going to say that a reference line contains 8 planes of reference and a reference point contains 6. Kind of ignore that for now. A reference line contains 4 planes of reference and 8 faces, so because each plane can be a back or a front. And then a reference point has 4 faces and then 2 planes. If it's on a line, it's only going to be 1, but other than that, it's trying to figure everything out for you, basically. So if a shape is curving like what is on the screen, it's going to follow that curve. So it's intelligent enough to know what's going on.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into making some basic massing shapes, such as extrusions or sweeps. So using those same sort of reference planes and points that we just learned about, let's go ahead and start with sort of this basic framework I made here, with just a number of planes going in each direction and then a few levels for us to use for references. Of course, before you sketch anything, you want to first select what plane you want that to go on. So we're just going to do a basic extrusion here, which I've already done a few times already. But what we're going to do is we're going to first select which plane we want that extrusion to be on. So I'm going to select this middle plane here, select that, just click it so it knows which plane you want, and then go to your drawing tools. Now we can make any shape we want to. We can do a pentagon, we can do a rectangle, we can draw a custom shape. As long as it's a closed profile, then we can extrude it up. So I'll just go ahead and make
Make something different. Make a pentagon or something, or a polygon.
Let's do like a polygon. So select this tool here.
And actually, when that tool pops up, you have the little active bar that comes up, the little green bar below it, that you can actually change how many sides it has. So if you don't want 6 sides and you want 8 sides, here's where you would change it. There's not another tool to say, all right, let's make this be 8 instead of 6. It's just a simple change of the number when you're placing it. So,
and you can see how that reference plane is sort of highlighted. It's sort of showing you what plane this new shape is going to be on.
this is a lot of stuff that was missing in 2010. Like being able to just figure out where you were in a project was really hard in 2010 because it didn't do stuff like highlight the reference plane you're using. It just lets you kind of figure it out on your own. So this is one thing that I definitely like in 2011, besides the actual conceptual massing altogether. But the fact that it's actually helping you figure out where you are so that you can work easier in the 3D environment. You know, not like Form Z where everything seems to be confusing, and if you don't do it, you know, step 1, 2, 3, you're completely lost.
His reference plane helped to sort of order your whole project so you can tell where things are and where they're actually constrained to. And now that it's on this plane and I've drawn it, I can actually select this plane and move this plane, and it would also move the shape I just created as well because it's constrained by this plane.
Now, this is where Revit's blowing the industry apart, because let's say you drew 100 different masses that you were using masses to represent a wall, and now you need to go back and say that every single one of those walls that you've drawn as a mass need to be 15 foot instead of 14 foot. You can just move the plane up 6 inches and it'll change every single wall. So it's a whole lot easier now. It just simply snaps, and that's the parametric part of Revit that you can ignore it. There's nothing saying that you have to abide by it, but in certain cases like this, you know, simple fixes of wall heights and stuff, it's really, really intuitive.
All right, so once you've done that sketch, you can easily select that shape. And a way to get out of sort of, if you just created a shape, let me do this real quick. Let's say I've selected my shape, I've changed the size, and then I've drawn it on here. If you don't hit escape or hit the modify command over here, then it's going to stay on that same drawing tool. So if you try to click somewhere, it's going to just start drawing another shape. So always make sure you hit the escape key or the modify command to the left to sort of reset back to the modify command. Now you have your selection tool, and you can select that shape we just created. You can click and drag it. I'm going to click and drag it towards the center here. And once you've selected it, to create the form, you actually have to go up here to the form sort of tab here and click down. It's going to say solid form or void form. And we're going to make a solid form. So just click that, and it'll make that basic extrusion for you. And that's sort of how you do just a basic extrusion.
Yeah, now that you have that polygon, you can actually go back, and every one of those sides are now editable. But not only are the sides able to be edited, but there's individual lines that can be edited too. So he just selected, you know, a simple line, and he can now push or pull that line to edit just that one line, and the whole shape is going to adapt itself to suit whatever you're doing. So this is something that if you try to do an in-place mass within a project, this is where it can start to get really, really hairy.
You can also select points as well.
Yeah.
Another thing to remember is the tab key on your keyboard cycles through different selections. So if I'm hovering over this edge here and I hit the tab command, it'll cycle through either the whole object, a line, another line, a face, another face, another face. Sooner or later it'll get to a point. And once you have that point, you can click that point, then actually move that point as well. So if you wanted to move it by points versus whole faces or lines.
Yeah, so we just drew a simple 8-sided polygon, but you can see how this 8-sided polygon could eventually be a completely new shape, and you just started with something really simple. There's no sense in adding all the crazy geometry in by yourself when you're just trying to figure out form. So I did notice that if you start editing, say if you had a 20-sided polygon and you're trying to edit each individual line to move in and out, Revit kind of just knows that if you're editing multiple lines, to call out the line first. So once you edit like the first 2 lines of that 20-sided polygon, it's going to intuitively know that you're trying to select a line the next time. Just like if you're trying to edit points over and over and over again, it's going to catch on that you're just editing points, and to give you the point selection first, not just the line selection or the face selection. So it kind of helps you out. You won't have to cycle through too much after actually starting to edit an object, especially if you're not just editing random pieces, but you're going in and saying, all right, I want to move each point out 6 inches for an overhang or something like that. You're thinking about a roof. it'll kind of just keep up with you and help you out.
Also take note that the spacebar will change from universal controls or relative controls. So right now, if you look at this at these anchors, you have two orange ones and a blue one. One is vertical, one is left, one is sort of right. But if I hit the spacebar, it'll change from the relative to the universal. So this is always north. This is always your left or your east and west. And this is your north and south. And this is your up and down. But if I hit the spacebar again, it'll switch to relative to this face. So now you see it's going, straight away from it and then straight down it versus, north and the south. Depending on what face you're on, it'll change the way those relative points look.
So universal is oriented by north, south, east, and west, and then top and bottom every time. And then relative is based on the line that you're clicking on, or the face you're clicking on, or the point you're clicking on, so that it'll pull it, at 90 degrees away from it, instead of trying to pull it north, south, east, or west. Something I actually didn't know until last year. About a good month into actually using Revit.
All right, so we're going to delete that and we're going to go to a loft now. A loft is made up of a certain number of profiles. So you can create sort of 3 different or 4 different, however many profiles you want, and then you can sort of loft the shape around those different profiles. So the reason I made sort of 3 different work planes here so that we can draw different profiles on each reference plane and then loft them all together. So we're going to first select this bottom plane, select it here, level 1. And we're going to say, doesn't matter what shape, I'll just make a series of rectangles. So I'm going to do a rectangle, and then I'm going to draw that shape down here. And then I'm going to hit escape to go to modify, escape. And now I'm going to select the second reference plane. And I'm going to draw another rectangle.
With the loft tool, you don't have to just, he is going to use just rectangles for the example, but the loft tool, you don't have to use the same reoccurring shape over and over again. You could do a circle and then a custom shape and then a rectangle. They could all be custom shapes. It doesn't matter. It's going to figure out the math for you. The big difference between the loft tool in the conceptual massing side and the in-place mass side is that on the in-place mass, the shapes have to be relatively close to the same number of faces, or it kind of messes up the geometry. It wouldn't have a problem with this because there's 4 lines. It's going to make 4 faces for every one of them. But if I tried to put a really custom shape in the middle as an in-place mass, and I had, say, 12 faces, it's going to kind of combine those faces into a really weird mash of shapes, and it's probably not going to turn out exactly how you want it. But in the conceptual side, it's actually going to try to make a more fluid shape, exactly what you're thinking in your head instead of some random shape.
Yeah. All right. So using your control key, hold that down and start to select all 3 of these profiles. So I'm going to select the first one, and then the second one, and the third. And once you have those selected, Revit will intuitively connect them all together. So once we have those selected, we're going to go to Create Form, Solid Form again. It'll create a shape around those 3 different forms. Now, unlike SketchUp, it does keep, smooth angles, so it won't faceted things unless you tell it to.
It will facet on the in-place mass side, unless that's what I was talking about earlier. So if you go from 4 to 5 faces up to 8 faces, it's going to facet every side. If you're on the conceptual side, it keeps really smooth.
Catherine had a question. Really, there is no actual tools. I'm just calling it a loft because that's what they refer to it as. When you use a series of different profiles, it's called a loft. But every single different shape you make, sweeps, extrusions, they're all created using just that one button that I just, sort of used. Is that Create Form tool.
Yeah, Revit only has Create Form. It's not like Form Z where you go in and actually say, all right, I want to do a sweep, or I want to do a revolve, or anything like that. There is a part of Revit that you do have to use buttons that have names instead of just creating arbitrary forms. But basically, a loft, we're just saying that there's multiple layers.
You're lofting.
Yeah, there's profiles that you're adding up to become one shape. That's what loft is. So there isn't a loft tool. Just like there's not a sweep tool, there's not an extrusion tool.
There's only a Create Form tool.
Yeah, there's only a Create Form tool, and judging by, you'll see as we go farther, judging by what you're actually clicking, whether it's the lines or profiles or edges, you're creating a shape without even knowing it. So you may be creating a sweep when you think you're lofting, or you think you're just creating an extrusion when you're actually creating a sweep instead.
Yeah, it's really, the name is really important as to what properties each different one has. Can the shapes be on horizontal and vertical planes? Alright, so let's say that we want to do a loft this way, so I can select this plane. It just depends on what planes you choose. If I select this plane here, I can go ahead and make a rectangle on this one, and then I hit escape, and then I go to this plane and create another shape, let's say this pentagon, and then I go to this reference plane and I create, you know, another one, and then I select those three shapes the same way we made the other loft. It doesn't matter which direction, and then hit create form. You would create the loft that way. So it doesn't necessarily matter where you do it or how you do it, it's just the idea behind it. So
yeah, and you don't have to use all vertical planes or all horizontal planes. If you're wanting a shape to bend like a sink faucet or something like that, you can use a vertical plane and a horizontal plane. No, the planes don't have to be parallel.
no. So let's say we had, even now you could, like once you made that, you can even move this edge over to where it's not even perpendicular to that face anymore. So now it becomes completely different, you know, than what the reference plane was trying to make it.
All right, so the next tool is or the next way to edit masses is actually revolving a shape. So revolve tool is actually, it's one of those things that most people aren't even going to try to do at first, because they think they're just going to take and create solid masses and then kind of carve away with voids to create the revolve. But revolves can do really neat things like light fixtures, and it only takes one revolve instead of 15 extrusions to create the same light fixture. So revolve, we're getting a little bit more complicated here, so Jeremy's going to go ahead and start doing a revolve. And with a revolve, you basically need a center axis and then half of a shape.
Or it doesn't have to be half a shape, it could just be, well, yeah, it has to be a profile.
Yeah, it has to be a profile that can be wrapped around it. So you have to kind of think three-dimensionally before you do this one. So you got to see how it would play out in your mind before you actually work it, and then take a slice of that, basically a section cut, but only draw one half of the section.
Okay, so always remember to select what reference plane you want to sort of draw on, or else it'll just default to who knows which reference plane. But I'm going to want this one to be at the bottom here. I don't know, let me put it in the center. So let me select the center plane first, click that. Always click the plane you want and then start sketching. So we selected that plane, and now I'm going to create, actually I'm going to start with first putting in a reference line. This reference line is what sort of gives you that center axis for the revolve. So if I click the reference line here, and then I just draw just a straight line up and down to act as our center point for the revolve, and then hit escape. Now I have that center reference line, and now I'm going to just draw a shape around that. So let's see what we got here. I'm just going to use this arc tool and create a profile here. Just be sure not to hit the edge of it, or it's going to think it's one whole shape. Instead, you want it to just be a center axis. So we got to start somewhere down off of the corner. So let's just start here. It doesn't really matter. And I'm going to start making a random shape here. I don't even know.
Looks kind of like a witch face. There's a mouth and a chin and a big nose. Perfect.
And what you want is for it to sort of end on this line. So wherever the profile has to end on the line, but not at the end points, just on the line.
It doesn't have to connect to that reference line, so don't think it does. If you're wanting space to be in the middle of it, so if you're creating a light and you need a gap down the center of it, you would just draw your lines at an offset off of that center. So just know that however you create it, it's going to revolve it exactly how it's drawn. So if it's attached to it, there's not going to be a hole down the middle. If it's off of it farther and farther, there's going to be a hole down the center of it.
But once you've created those two, now you just do the same thing you would always do, and you just select your center point and then you select your profile. Doesn't matter which order you do them in. It should still create the revolve. So I'll select those two elements. Then I'd go to the same button right here, your Create Form tool, and hit Solid Form. And it should rotate it around that center point.
What a strange shape. Kind of looks like something off Star Wars. That's one of the Ridge Racers turbines.
Or looks like the robot from WALL-E.
Yeah.
The one I fell in love with.
It's Eve.
And so anyway, so there's a revolve. And in the same way you can sort of push and pull faces, you can also do that here. So in case you want to make this a little wider, you can always select it and just move it out and it'll make it actually wider.
Nice. Nice.
Or you can select this face and you can do the same thing.
Alright.
I get a little donut.
Now it's a mushroom.
Alright, you take it, you move it back some, make it a little wider. So once you've created something, you can always keep adjusting it and editing it even after it's already created. Let's see what happens when I move this up here. There we go.
So I mean, as you can see, it's a neat tool. I mean, you started with something that was just a revolve that you don't really have any kind of depth with, and then you made it something that completely doesn't resemble the shape that existed under it. If you drew it, you know where it came from, but nobody could guess that came from the shape that it actually came from.
Yeah, the original profile.
Alright, so that's revolve. All of them are created the same though. That's just what we're going to call it. And then the last one is sweep, which is probably one of the cooler ones, I would say, because you can, well, besides loft, you'll figure out that loft can be pretty amazing. I mean, that's basically, you can create a whole skin of a skyscraper out of just the loft tool. And so it takes weeks and turns it into a day. The sweep tool, though, you can really create some custom stuff with sweeps. For anything, for the family components in Revit, for the in-place masses, or a conceptual mass. So with a sweep, the only thing you need is a path for the sweep to follow and a shape that you're sweeping, or shapes. It doesn't matter. So you can do like a loft that is swept kind of thing, or you can do just a regular sweep. So we'll start with a regular sweep where we just choose a reference plane. We're going to draw a path. It doesn't matter what the path is. That's what's cool. It can be anything. So let's do some crazy path for this one, because that's what best shows it off. So the tool he's using right now is called the spline tool, which is the first thing I think of when I think of a sweep, is splines. And splines kind of readjust themselves based on the next point you put in the project. And so if you go back in and edit one of those points, it's going to readjust itself with the other two lines, which is really neat. So you can start with a boring shape, and then you can start to really make the curves look nice. So you know, maybe you don't like the curve in that little area, so you move it down to make it more of a smooth transition. You know, it's really nice. So the next thing you're going to want to do is select one of those points. I normally wouldn't select the first point or the end point. The best one to do is probably the second one from either side of the sweep, the line that you made, and then you're going to put a shape on it, because you've already selected the point. So let's do, you know, whatever shape, a square. That's great. I mean, the reference plane popped up, so you can kind of tell. It's a little bit disorienting sometimes. You wouldn't think that reference plane would be turned that way, but it is. So we're going to put a shape on it. The shape doesn't have to intersect
Anything.
it doesn't have to intersect the line at all. I mean, you could put that square way off the line, and it's still going to sweep around that object. So it's not even as
still
it's
on the
rotating.
same plane.
It's on the plane, but it's in no relation to that line whatsoever now, and you can still sweep that. So just like with every other tool, you're going to select the line and the profile that you made. So you select the line first, and now the profile, and then you're going to go back to create form and do a solid form. Uh-oh.
Oh, good.
Intersecting singular geometry.
If it cuts into itself while it's trying to sweep
Yeah.
around it, then it will not create a form. So let me make this a little bit smaller. Not so crazy.
The error message that just popped up was that you had intersecting singular geometry, and that basically means you can't have 3D geometry being in the same place at the same point in time. So somehow that shape was hitting itself. So maybe by making it a little bit smaller, it actually worked this time. Alright, so there you go. So I mean, I can just keep coming up with reasons to use this tool just because it always fascinates me what kind of shapes you can actually create.
And then once you have that, you can actually make this a little bit bigger if you wanted to and see how far you could stretch it. Since it wouldn't let you do it before. Here you can start to make it a little bit wider and see how far you can go. Yeah.
There it goes.
Once it goes to where it starts to cut into itself, it won't let you create it. So sometimes it's better just to create it first and then make it the size you want. So I can take that and move it out some more. It's a bendy ruler.
All right, so that's basically all the creation tools. We're pretty good on time, so I think we're going to go into editing tools a little bit deeper. I mean, the first editing tool we kind of already went over. That's the push-pull. You can push and pull any face, basically like he's doing now. He was editing those faces.
Now, before we go on, in case you made a shape that didn't have any points already on it, like say it was a rectangle. No, I'm not saving. No, I'm not playing. Let me select this reference plane. Let's say we had a rectangle that we made for our path. Now, to do a sweep around this, you'd have to select a reference point, which we talked about earlier, here. And then you're going to take that point and place that one on the shape. And now that point should be hosted by that line.
Yeah. And this is another thing, like you notice he didn't put the point in the corner.
Yeah, don't do.
That's just kind of, we know what to do. You don't want to put a point in a corner because then two reference planes pop up and it kind of gets confused every once in a while. Just like you don't want to select the end point of a sweep, just out of good practice. So anything can be swept around any object. It doesn't matter what it is. And it's kind of neat to watch how it bevels the edges and stuff. So it's mitering them at 45. It's kind of like millwork, which can really, we'll get into this a little bit later with something called adaptive components, or curtain panel systems would be another thing you could use this for. So you could create a parametric curtain family, edit it in a family editor, not inside the conceptual mass, and then you could actually apply that to an entire wall, a repeated shape over and over and over again. So it can end up being something that's really dynamic if you really put your mind to it. So like I said, the first tools in mass editing are pushing and pulling. I think that's fairly simple. It's not really hard to understand. We already said to kind of use the tab tool or the tab key to cycle through points or lines depending on where you're at. The next one would be the actual rotate command. We haven't gone over the rotate at all, but if Jeremy draws, let's draw a square just to show kind of the simple form of it.
Could you? There's a question here. Could you stretch this this curved shape? Like if I grab both sides of it, you could like stretch this face here down further, but you couldn't exactly like stretch it out, as if it was a piece of string and you stretched it out and it went flat. I don't think you could do that.
You would have to, if you're trying to get it not to be as much of a curve, you need to edit the actual shape, the spline that it came from.
Yeah, you could edit the points that it's made of. We're going into later parts of the session, but
yeah.
If I went to X-ray mode, I could see those points that make it up, and then I could move these points to adjust the shape of it. But I couldn't just like stretch it out like it was a piece of string or something.
No, because it's still going to try to abide by that's giving it a rule. You're saying follow that spline, so
it's following these
points.
It's
trying to follow those points. So unless you can edit those points, it's not going to let you change it. But like he did, show them one more time. Cancel out of that, and we'll cover this more in depth later. But so if you want to get to those points, so you don't like how this curve is coming up, so you select the whole object that you're wanting to edit.
Using the tab command to get
use the tab. Now it's all selected, so you're going to click it, and you're actually going to go to the X-ray command. And that's something we're kind of saving for Thursday because there's a lot of really neat stuff you can do with an X-ray command. But X-ray basically, it makes the thing transparent and shows you the origins that it came from, the reference points that's making it, and the reference lines that are making it. So you can edit these on the fly. pulling those points up or down, whatever you want to do with them, just like you was doing before. And say now you like this shape instead, so you click off of X-ray. You don't have to click off for X-ray if you're not really pleased with it, but it's always good to go ahead and get off of the tool you're using. Otherwise, you're going to constantly try to X-ray stuff, and it's not.
Yeah, it'll stay transparent.
Yeah, it's not going to work for you. So that's pretty simple. Does that answer your question, though?
So you can still adjust it, but.
All right, great.
And wait, another thing I didn't really explain, but I just turned a square into a circle, and I was done just by. I probably can't even go back that far.
No, it's basically it's adding two tools together, because the tools aren't independent of each other, because you're only using reference lines, basically, profiles, edges, and then you're creating a form from it. So it's what he basically did was he used the loft and the sweep all in one. So it's like combining those. You're not going to say, all right, use the loft tool, now use the sweep tool. That's kind of what you had to do in 2009 Revit, but not in 2011. In 2010, it was a disaster.
Yeah, so I can select each one of these points and put a different profile on it, and then select all those things, and Revit will intuitively change the shape based on the profiles while it follows this same line. So you can have a couple of pretty complex things going on. So now if I select all these, it'll be a loft slash a sweep kind of thing.
Yeah. We'll call it a leap.
If it's not too crazy. Yeah, a leap.
So I mean, there are going to be some kind of boundaries when you're making these shapes.
Yeah.
But you'll kind of learn those as you go. Like, that was a pretty ridiculous shape. I don't know where you'll ever use this, but I mean, that was 5 profiles and then a sweep line, a spline.
You want to make a sexy chair leg or something.
Yeah, it still didn't hesitate. No problem.
Yeah.
So now to get back to some of the more raw editing tools, let's go over the edge command. I mean, the rotate command.
Okay.
That's best explained with a simple shape, not a complex one. You can still do it to a complex one, but it's just a little harder to wrap your head around the 3D environment. So let's just use a polygon or something.
Yeah, something like this.
And basically, you're going to draw out a shape, and much like the extrusion tool, where you would select a face and actually be able to push and pull it. With the rotate command, you're actually going to use the rotate on a face you've selected, and then you'll be able to twist whichever side you're wanting to twist, or rotate whichever side you're wanting to rotate. So let's do like one of those sides or something that way.
I'll do this face.
Do the top, yeah.
So if you select this, you still have some of your modifying commands like scale and rotate. So let's say we scale this first. I hit scale, then I go here and I say I want this point to this point to not be 65 feet. Click those 2 points and I can stretch it out some. Let's say I want it to be 100 feet. So I'll type in 100.
That's another thing to take note of is in Revit, you don't have to hit the feet symbol. You don't have to hit the semicolon, not the semicolon, but the hyphen symbol.
Yeah, the little thing.
You don't have to hit the singular rabbit here. You hit
It formats the feet automatically.
Yeah. So, but if you do, say, if you want inches, this is the most confusing one. Is you don't have to put a parentheses. I mean, a quotation symbol. I'm getting all my words mixed up. You don't have to do a quotation after inches. You can just do feet. So if you wanted to do 1 foot 6, you just do 1 space 6, and it knows that 1 is going to be a foot, and then 6 inches. So it automatically knows that, and that saves a lot of time when you're typing in feet hundreds of times a day.
Yeah, whenever you see a dimension showing up, you can go ahead and type in exactly what you want versus doing it graphically.
Yeah.
So once I started to change this, and I can type in now, 300 space 25.
It'll just do a quarter if you did that.
Space 11, it'll do like 14 inches, 300 feet and 14 inches. And then it'll scale it to that point. That's ugly though. Let me change it.
It is ugly.
So let's say I resize this. So you have your resize command, but you also have your rotate command. So if I have the same face selected, select that space, and I go to rotate. I can move this point as well to say where I want it to rotate around. Say I want to rotate from this corner. There's this little thing right here, you probably can't see it. It's like a little twisty symbol, and wherever that is, that's the rotate anchor point.
Yeah, and you can drag that around anywhere you want.
So if I click and drag it, you really can't see it.
And that basically becomes the center point of the rotate. So it may be better to actually show them the rotate from a point instead of the center, because the center is obvious what it's going to do. It's going to twist it around the center. So drag it to one of those other
Yeah, no,
points.
because that was going to be way too crazy.
And
All
then,
right, this
and then barely rotate it
let's rotate around this point.
and see what happens. Probably give us a donk error.
All
All right, so it rotated around that point, which you might not be able to tell at first, but if you actually went to an elevation view, it rotated the shape higher up in the air as well as twisting it. So if you look now, the shape's got more elevation up above than it does below because it had to rotate up toward that point.
Also take this back face and rotate it some more, just for fun. And it starts to twist the whole shape. Let's do it some more. At a certain point, it says no, I believe. But you can.
It's whenever it runs out of room to actually twist it anymore and make it comprehensible.
Yeah, it starts to.
So you see how the center is starting to tighten down? Eventually the center will start to overlap itself, and then it'll say, no thanks, can't do that. But I immediately think like wrought iron when I start twisting shapes. Like a wrought iron sculptor. Somebody that's really twisting metal and bending metal, or glass work, something like that. Something where you're adding little intricate details by revolving something or rotating it. So, all right. That's pretty straightforward. Now let's jump into, even progressively more difficult things, like the add edge command and the add profile command. So first we need a shape. Start with that would be nice. Let's start with a basic shape and then really blow it out of proportion again.
Let's start with like a rectangle.
Yeah.
So it's going to, same thing, select the reference plane first, select your rectangle tool, draw a generic rectangle, and then even while it's still selected, you can hit create form without having to select it. Like while you see it, you still see these dimensions and stuff because it's still kind of selected. You could go ahead and click create form right after, and it'll go ahead and create the form without having to select it. But anyway, so there's your form. Now let's say we pushed it up a little bit. Now once you have a face selected, you'll see sort of some buttons will pop up here. So I select this face, and now you have your edit profile, your create form, your divide surface, your x-ray, your add edge, your add profile. So let's say we want to add an edge. You can sort of see in the graphic of the button that add an edge is sort of a line down the side of it. And just to show you what that does, let's say we want to add an edge. It's more for sides versus tops. So let's say this edge here. It'll show you a line where that edge is going to be at.
Add edge is vertically. Add profile is horizontally every time.
So it starts to add divisions to your shape. So once we divide that, we can now go hit escape, and we can go to modify. Then we can select that edge, and then manipulate that, and bring it out some. And now we just created, a polygon.
So it's a house that got hit by a tornado.
Let's see here. So I can do the same thing for this edge if I wanted to. Hit escape, and then modify. Click the line. I can even move this one up if I wanted to. Now we have a completely different shape.
Alright, weird.
Now if you wanted to do add profile, again you have to select something first, so let's select its face, and then let's go to add profile. And these will be your horizontal lines. It'll sort of show you the makeup of this shape. As you can see, it sort of has a C shape at the bottom and then goes up to a polygon shape. So let's just click in the center here. It'll sort of divide it up again. The thing about that is you really can't see that line. It sort of disappears once you escape. What you can do is slowly hover over it and it'll pop up, and you can hit the tab button to sort of cycle through until you select that profile. Once I select that, I can now select that profile and select it, and I can move it left or right like that. Of course, now you start to get these weird little looking shapes. It's funny looking.
Random lines dipping in really hard.
I can move it up a little bit, doesn't really change much. Or I could cancel. Yeah, once it gets too crazy,
it's because of the curve in the back.
Yeah, this weird little uppity.
Yeah, there's no way you could create that anyway, so.
I could also select this and then do the same commands we just did before, like rotate. Go to rotate.
Oh boy, it's really going to mess up.
Let's see what happens here. And just rotate just a little bit. And
No.
nothing. Can't even do it.
It's that one little peak in the background, in the back, that's throwing it off.
Yeah, let's take out that.
If you take out
Crazy.
that raise you did, it'll work
Raise.
fine. Now go back to add profile.
We can make that shape. Select the face again. Quick question. All right, shoot it out. Add profile. The way I'm deleting the whole object is, again, you're using that tab command to sort of cycle through your selections. Instead of sort of selecting one face, I have to just hover over one, hit the tab key, and it'll cycle to the whole selection. You see it says form element. So it's showing, so I'm selecting the entire object, not just one face or one plane or one line. Of course, the same way you could go and keep hitting the tab command and cycle through, your edges versus your points versus your faces. So I'll select one side, I'll hit tab, and it'll cycle through until I select the whole thing.
And some of it's he's actually hitting just undo.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm just hitting undo, so it'll go back to
Yeah, so we can go back to the default
Sorry about
stuff
that.
we're at.
Yeah, I'm hitting.
All right, so we got one more question. All right, never mind.
Dang it, Dana.
No question.
Anyway, so let's add that. What the profile's in there. You can't really see it until I hit tab. It'll highlight it. But if I keep hitting tab, it should cycle to it if I'm hovering over it just right.
Go ahead and edit the whole profile, and then use the edit profile command this time. So we're doing
What do
two
you mean?
things at once. Edit profile. Like actually go to the top now and edit.
Well, let me change this. So I'm just going to select this by using the tab command. So I select it, and I'm just going to resize it. I'm just going to resize it, hitting the resize command right here. And then I'm just going to do a generic to make it a little bit bigger.
Not a lot bigger.
There you go.
A little bit.
And now you have a diamond. Done. Diamond. Alright, so anyway, I'm going to undo that.
The good thing that like Revit 2011 is doing with a lot of this is it's taking some of the think work out of it. Like, I know everybody remembers Form Z and not knowing what the heck you were actually doing. And if it gave you an error, you had no way of knowing why the error was occurring. And a lot of times it's just because you couldn't make the shape. But Form Z couldn't just tell you, all right, you can't make the shape, so don't even try. It would let you get a bonk error for 15 minutes of your life every day of the week. But the cool thing about Revit is now, it used to not do this, when you select a shape or a face or a line, all the tools pop up that you can use. So if they're grayed out, you can't use them. So for instance, if he clicks this face or the top face, he can do any of those.
But
they work fine. But he can't do things like Mira, he can't copy that. He can't do an arrangement or an array because that would basically over constrain it. You can do it a different way, but not simply by clicking a button and doing it.
I can't paste it.
So the other cool thing though is click edit profile when you're on there.
Yeah, so I select the face, and you have your options here. So edit profile.
And you are technically editing the profile when you're like that, but this is a more raw editing profile. So he can take and just delete one of those lines and put an arc in instead.
I could just draw a completely new shape if I
Yeah,
wanted to.
you could delete the entire shape because it doesn't matter what you're doing at that point in time. It matters what you end with. As long as you end with a closed loop, you're fine. Just make sure every point's touching and then click the check mark. And it's going to redo that shape based on the new profile that you just edited.
That's actually a new tool in 2011. So if you're not using 2011, there was no edit profile tool before. So I could go to edit profile and completely delete this whole thing.
And then just draw a new shape.
Let me do that slower since people are missing it. Yeah, so you select the face, or I don't think it even matters which face because it'll know. Then I can go to edit profile right up here. Oh, it's going to ask me. Okay, a face isn't actually a profile. It has to be sort of a profile. So this is the profile. There's also a profile on the bottom here, so I can select which profile I want to edit.
That's what I was saying earlier. Profiles are only horizontal
Yeah,
to the
horizontal.
plane you drew them on. So if you drew that extrusion at first on a vertical plane, then the profile is going to be vertical. And then the edges will be horizontal. So you have to know where the object came from in
Yeah.
order to actually edit it.
So now I can select this face, this horizontal face, and then I can go to edit profile. and then it'll show me what makes up that shape, and then I could easily just delete this, or even delete the whole thing, and then go to a new drawing tool like a rectangle. Too fast still? Jesus.
All right, you can edit the vertical faces, but it's not a profile, so you can't edit profile. It doesn't know where the reference plane is, and without a reference plane, you can't edit easily anything.
Yeah, it's kind of based on how you created it too. If it's an extrusion, then you can edit sort of the profiles that made that extrusion. If it's a sweep, then you can edit those profiles as well. But you can't really change the way the face looks because that's not really what's defining it. The profiles are.
You just have to kind of get yourself to remember that parallel to the plane you drew the object on is a profile, and perpendicular is an edge, so it doesn't have a profile because that profile is being created from geometry clashing together. So you can't really edit it because there's a lot of booleans and sweeps being processed and a lot of smoothing of the shape that it would be kind of weird to edit it because, I mean, it's an arc and a twist. It doesn't have a flat shape that represents it.
So what I just did was I first selected that face. I clicked here, I selected the face, I said edit the profile. And then when I got here, it doesn't matter what shape this is. You can draw whatever you want to. So I just deleted this whole thing just by clicking and dragging all these lines. Then I hit delete. Now there's nothing here. Now if I draw any closed shape, like let's say a circle, and then I hit finish profile, it'll adjust the shape to match the new one I created.
So basically, what it just did was we turned an extrusion into a loft without actually knowing it. So it lofted that shape.
So just connecting this profile to this one.
Yeah, and it's trying to do it in the easiest way possible. If you started to lengthen that circle, make that circle go higher in the air, it's going to quit having a lot of that clashing geometry that exists. But the fact that the shapes are just a little bit weird makes it hard. Also, what he just did was when you edit the profile, you can actually edit points by you divided it, right?
Yeah, what you can do is this is all one closed loop, so it doesn't really know where to connect the lines from the bottom part because we're going from a polygon to a circle which has like no sides. So for it to know where to connect these sides to in a circle, you can split it using the split line command. Where is it at? This is something pretty important when you're creating, crazy shapes. Where is it? I know the shortcut is SL, but here's a command up here. I think it's this one right here. No, it's mirror. Here's right here. Split element. So click this one.
Those are the buttons that were changed since 2010, and because we all use shortcuts, it's hard to tell.
And I'll just split this in 4 places, just so it's not just one closed loop, so you can kind of know what points it sort of breaks up at. And then when I do that and hit finish, it should connect to those 4 points at these corners. One here, at these where they split is where it should connect the lines.
Yeah.
So if I hit finish, you should be able to see that. Now you see it's connecting here, 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 and here.
So if you had a polygon with 10 sides and you wanted it to extrude up to a circle, if you put 10 points on the circle, then theoretically the shape becomes more smooth as it goes up.
Yeah, so if I I can split this a few more times, even more than I need to, just to make sure.
Yeah, and it's just going to find the best solution. You're giving it options, and it's going to find the solution.
Then I hit finish. It looks so
now it's starting to look a little bit better and not as wonky. And then we had a question: can you now extrude the top? And yeah, you can.
Yeah,
you can just click the face and then start to drag it up. And that's where if you have like a shape that looks like it's kind of imploding on itself, if it looks like the shape is stressed, there's not enough room for you to actually create that shape. That might not be a bad thing. You may want that in your architecture, but best practice would be to go ahead and give it a little bit of breathing room or figure out a way to make the shape a little less complex or to add surfaces in where it's actually dividing itself. So that's profile and we'll add profile and add edge basically.
Just to show the difference between the profile is dependent on the work plane. So this plane is flat, so the profiles are going this way.
Yeah.
But if I were to draw an extrusion on this plane, I'll just do that real quick. Then the profiles will actually be this way versus, so now if I say, I select it and say add profile, they'll actually be going along this edge.
That's what I was saying earlier. Whichever plane you draw it on, it's always parallel is the profile.
And now the edge is actually
And the edge would be perpendicular every single time.
perpendicular to that.
So that's the best and simplest way to explain the difference between profile and edge. All right, so we're definitely going to get into that more in later sessions. But let's move on to, you've seen us kind of skip past the void command a couple of times. But the void command, I mean, it basically does exactly what it says. It can void out the shape. It does have secondary preferences where if you're adding or subtracting geometry from it, you can actually make the void become the solid, if that makes sense, and not the void. So you can actually let the void remain, and then you're taking away from the solid and you're deleting everything around the void. But in simple terms, the void can be used to cut into anything.
So let's say in SketchUp, if you wanted to make a void, you would just draw a shape on this and then push it down.
Yeah.
Works similarly in this program. So let's say we wanted to put a circle hole down the center of this. What we would do is first select this face and then go to our drawing tools. I'm just going to select circle, select that, and then draw on that face a shape. And then once I've created that shape, I'm going to select it and then go to create form, but this time instead of solid we're going to say void. Click void, and automatically goes down and into that mask. And now you can select that face as well and push that down further if you wanted to.
Yeah, the little, if
Even make it
you
go all the way
noticed a
through.
quick glimpse, there was two boxes that popped up at the bottom. Sometimes Revit is saying there's multiple options to the same thing. So if you step back to where it said those two options, just so they can see it again. All right, so down at the bottom, the little squares, one of it's basically saying one of them's going up and one of them's going down, or one of them's rotating. Sorry, cough. Yeah.
There's a little ball in there.
It's basically the circle has a central axis already. So it was saying, do you want this just to be a normal extrusion, or do you want us to rotate the circle around its own proprietary geometry? I normally just use the first command. The first command is normally the one that you're trying to do, and then I've seen this pop up to where it has 5 or 6 different options though, where I was trying to create a sweep, but it thinks I was trying to loft or revolve those shapes as well. And you may end up creating a shape that you like a lot better just by going through those options really quick.
Yeah, and trying out different ones.
Yeah.
Let me put a square so it doesn't look as nasty. Alright. Create void form. See, here it doesn't ask you because it knows you can only do one option.
Yes, a square is not really ever going to be revolved, so not in that situation. But you may want to do a square. I mean a circle, or a polygon, or a spline.
An interesting thing is the void is actually an element by itself, so you can actually select that void. It's actually a whole shape. You just can't see it. So it actually extends past the edge of this. So if I were to put another shape on top of this, it would cut out of that one as well.
Yeah.
Unless you told it not to.
But a void's also cool because you can still select the faces and just make this hole bigger or smaller. Or you make it deeper, but you can also select the side ones and just completely tear it out of the side if you wanted to.
Because all it's doing is changing that shape that the void creates. So now the void is this shape versus the way it was before.
That's something that you kind of can't do in SketchUp. You can to a certain extent, but once you start editing really complex masses where you're like submerging voids inside of solid geometry and you're going to make it pop out of different places at different times, you could have an object that didn't look like it was voided, and then you made it look perforated from the outside just because of that void. So you can do some really neat stuff with voids.
Yeah, here I'm just going to try and do a sweep void.
You can, everything that you can do with a solid object, you can do with a voided object. The question was, can you edit the profile of the voided object?
Yes.
Yeah. A voided object is just a solid object that cuts. It doesn't really have to, it could just call it, a cutting form versus a solid form. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a void. Like I said, it can do twofold, and later on, I think next week sometime, we'll show you how you can actually reverse what a void does, where it actually becomes more of a solid in the project instead of a void. So yeah, it's just another edible object, easy.
Yeah, so I can just select that void and then say edit a profile, and I can select the profile. And then I could go ahead and change this a little bit if I wanted to. Maybe make it go out larger
Yeah,
at the top.
definitely.
And then hit finish the same way we've done it before. And then click off of it. And now it's cutting out the whole top of it.
Nice. As I was talking, you a void.
Exactly.
It is a hidden object. It's kind of like you went in with a knife and you cut it out, and then you take the knife away. I mean, it's still there. You still can use a knife at any point in time. It's not that.
Or you still have the remains. They're just turned invisible.
Yeah.
Basically. Instead of.
It's not that you're deleting it. It's just you're removing it out of hindsight for the time being.
Yeah, you're just making it to where you can't see it yet. Especially, it's still there. It's just hidden now.
Yeah.
And I can still just delete this shape, and it'll go right back to where it was.
Yeah, he
before.
could delete the void, and it's going to bring back the solid immediately.
So it's not like you've ever lost anything, which is cool.
Yeah.
SketchUp, I don't think there's no void, so it's gone.
Yeah.
So instead of creating, a crazy form, you could make a square and then void out, the craziness, and then still have that square there to change later.
Right.
Versus creating a crazy form and then, I don't know.
All right, so that's basically the void tool. Anything you can do with a solid, you can do with a void. They work the exact same way. There's absolutely no difference in them. The next thing we need to talk about, well, we've already talked about the X-ray command, so let's kind of skip that for now.
We can still just do it again real quick.
Delete some of that first.
Maybe
So
do that.
if we want to X-ray this shape that has 3 profiles attached to it, you could click the whole shape. You need to select the whole shape or whatever.
It'll still go X-ray.
Okay,
Doesn't matter
X-
once you select the face on the shape, then hit X-ray. It'll show the contents of the entire shape.
All right, so there's the X-ray. This looks a little bit more complicated than the sweep we did, just because there's more points, and you can actually see every point he put on that circle is still there.
Yeah, everywhere I split it at becomes a point. And so it connects those points with the points of the shape below it, and that's sort of how it creates that from square
And you
to
can
circle.
still take the center dark line is basically the spine of the project, the spine of this shape you've created, and then all the purple circles are the profile points, basically, or the edge points. So you can actually click on the black dots, which are the spine. You can click on those points and start to drag them and move them as well, and it'll start moving the shape in and out. So anywhere you want it to go.
Instead of trying to drag the whole profile or trying to grab one edge,
Right.
it's a little easier to just sort of select that spine and adjust the whole shape of everything.
Right.
Also, it helps a lot when you have this because you can see all the sort of hidden profiles and hidden points that make up your complex shape. So once you're here, you can go in and easily select, these different points and move them around versus trying to select them when it's hard to see anything. Okay. Oops. Never back. So it's much easier to sort of select these lines here than it is when the mask has all of the covering on it. Especially with sweeps where you can't even see the points unless you go to X-ray mode.
All right, so kind of the last tool, the last tool that's beginner-ish, intermediate-ish, is the dissolve command.
Also, before you go to that, to make sure you click the X-ray button to get out of X-ray.
Yeah.
If you don't, it's going to stay, X-rayed all the time while you change stuff.
Once you edit things in X-ray mode, get out of X-ray mode.
Yeah.
And you can't just escape out of it.
You have to hit the X-ray button.
You have to hit the X-ray button again. So let's say with this form, say we did a lot of work, but now we want to kind of just start over really quick. We want to see how we made that shape, would be a better explanation. So if we select that shape and then say dissolve, it'll actually tell you the origins of where that shape came from. So as you can see, it's saying you have 3 profiles, and that shape is made of those 3 profiles. So it kind of lets you know where you're coming from, so you can understand what you're doing a little bit better.
And now you can remake that same shape just by selecting these, or you could even change these shapes or add more profiles. So it's much easier to sort of change a dynamic, massive form here with just lines than it is to sort of try and push and pull the entire mass, which is one thing to keep in mind. So if you have like a complex, skyscraper with 20 different floors with 50 different profiles, I would dissolve that, change the profiles, and then re-update it and see how it looks like, instead of trying to push and pull, certain sides of it one at a time.
Yeah, in 2010, this was a little bit more difficult to do this because you didn't have a dissolve command in 2010. So when I did my skyscraper for Liz this past semester, I started the project in 2010, and then I migrated it to 2011 when 2011 came out, and I had to actually go in and either just redo the whole shape again, or I had to push and pull every single point that made up that profile over and over again up 60 floors of the building. The dissolve command is right beside the add profile and add edge, right where his mouse is sitting.
So make sure you select something first.
Yeah, it has to be selected.
Any face, and then hit the dissolve command, and it will dissolve it back to the profile that defined it.
All right, so we're going to kind of wrap up with this last little point before we go to some more questions if y'all have them. And this is probably the most advanced thing we'll talk about on Thursday, but we need to kind of preface that advanced topic now. So this is called dividing surfaces.
Well, if you dissolve something, either you undo it or you recreate it by selecting the same profiles. You can't sort of say stop dissolving.
Yeah, you can't say dissolve. The question is, how do you get out of dissolve? And the answer is you can't get out of dissolve. Yeah. Once you dissolve, the shape is gone.
Yeah.
So you either Control Z or you remake the shape.
It deletes all the faces and just leaves you with the line.
You're literally dissolving. Like imagine putting an acid on something.
If you didn't actually want to delete all the sides, you would use the X-ray command, where you're still sort of adjusting the shape itself. Versus dissolve, you're going back to where you started with just the profiles.
Yeah, it took me a little bit to understand what dissolve was actually doing, and the best way to explain it is, say you had a solid object, say a piece of foam or something, and you poured, some type of boric acid on top of it. You can't just say now let's unacid that piece of foam, because once it's dissolved, it's done.
It can break something out to its chemical.
Yeah, at least in Revit, you can hit undo.
Yeah, it's not like there's a lot of sort of similar commands to do almost sort of the same thing. You have your edit profile, you have your add profile, you have your dissolve, you have your X-ray, but they also have their own differences between them.
If you wanted to go back in and make that shape, you could still, it's dissolved right now, but you could still click every one of those profiles and then hit create form.
The exact same form that you just had.
Yeah, so it'll re-loft that form for you or re-sweep that form. But there's no undissolve button. So, all right, to move on to the last little thing we're talking about, which is probably a big thing, but we're going to break it up between now and the next meeting, is divide surface. And kind of simply put, divide surface is how to add a texture to a wall that's really parametric and will flex with the wall at any point in time. Now this has multiple things you can do with it. Divide surface can either be used to help you place points and align things. It can help you create a custom window system, so you're not using just the boring curtain wall system inside of Revit and creating boring storefront mullions over and over again. You can add an actual component around that divide surface, whether it's on a polygon or a grid or whatever it may be. And then you can do something called adaptive components, which is basically taking curtain wall systems to a whole nother level, to where they're not just curtain wall systems. Now they can be anything that you want them to be. They can be concrete, they can be brick, they could be metal, they could be whatever. Okay, what did you actually need to see again? One person's screen was a little bit black. So do you need to see how to go back to the shape once you've dissolved it, or do you need to see it dissolve one more time?
Alright, so anyway, but divide surface, let's just go ahead and divide one of these real quick just to show you what it looks like. Once you select a face, and this command is sort of face dependent, so if you wanted the divided surface to be on this face or this one, make sure you select the right face first. I'm going to select this one because it's sort of the larger one here. And then you go to your divide surface command, which is right beside your add edge, your add profile, your create form tool. So we're going to click that. And what that does is it divides the surface based off of a horizontal and a vertical grid. This one here is just the generic one, which is just a rectangle system with verticals and horizontals. But if you look to your left, under your properties, there's actually a way to change that to a number of different pre-made systems. So there's a triangle, there's triangle flat, there's zigzag, there's rectangle checkered. There's a bunch of different ones here, which we'll go over more in depth next class. But what these do is they sort of divide them up differently. So if I choose a hexagon, now it's sort of a hexagon shape. But what these sort of hexagons entail is you can make a custom component for each one of these hexagons. And these hexagons will change and adapt depending on your spacing and your sizes for these. So instead of 12 by 12, we change this to a 6 by 12 or something like that. It will change the size of those. And the idea is to create a component that would fit inside these perfectly. SBSU, what a coincidence. And they will also change and adapt to the surface itself, as well as the spacing that you imply.
Yeah, when you click on this divided surface one more time, you see in the pop down modify, it has something called U grid and V grid. V grid is vertical grid and U grid is horizontal grid. I'm not actually sure why yet that they use the U or the V, but
V makes sense. Vertical.
Yeah, V makes sense. U, I'm not really sure yet. I wish I had an answer for that, but U is horizontal, V is vertical. If you can remember vertical, just know the other one's perpendicular to it. And basically, every one of these grids are going to operate off of a square. So you may think, how can you have a horizontal grid and a vertical grid when you're using a polygon? And it's simply that it's creating a square under that you don't see at all. That those polygon, yeah, it means horizontal. but it has the squares under it. The normal pattern, and it's basically just changing those based on that normal pattern, like where these snaps may be implied along that actual grid that's being created that you can't see. But the reason we kind of brought this up today, you can look through it in the PowerPoint to kind of get ahead a little bit. I would actually say go ahead and do that tonight while it's still a little bit familiar. As you can create 3D component work, which is really highly parametric, meaning it's going to snap and change with the model when you actually update it or change it or whatever you do to it. It's going to move with you. And that's kind of a preface to creating families later on. And a family, you're going to hear us say that more and more as we start doing these webinars, but a family is just a component. That's the best way to say it. A family is a table, a family is a chair, a family is anything.
But then there's also the parametric families, which will change and adapt depending on, say the sizing or the spacing on this component. So the more complex families, which actually can change and adapt, and then there's the simpler ones, which is like a generic chair that's not really going to change in size, versus a table that would change in size, versus a structural system / window mullion system, which has to change in size constantly depending on the way the form you're placing it on changes and morphs. So we'll get into sort of how to create a custom component for these, because it's not really interesting right now to see this sort of divided into squares of blank and clear. But once you create a custom component that can go into one of these spaces, you start to see sort of how complex and crazy a project can get. And there's an example in the PowerPoint showing a system I used on a previous project where it became the structural system and the window glazing system that was the sheathing of the building. And it's pretty complex if you look at it. I mean, I don't even know how I did it now, but
yeah. In his project, it became it became a family that served more than just a purpose of being an adaptive component for a window system. It actually served as a shutter system as well. Yeah. If anybody saw my project from last semester, I created a family that had multiple apertures and that adaptive component became the whole skin of my building, and the aperture opened and shut depending on where the light was in the sky. So it was something that was a really simple thing. I mean, it was literally sweeping a square that was concrete texture, but then it became, you know, a whole nother level of it actually adjusting itself to the sun. So that's, you know, two cool things that can be done with adaptive components. One Jeremy was talking about is probably a little more complex, but then mine, you know, changed. Every single one didn't have a likeness to the other one that was next to it, which is a little bit harder to tie a parameter into it that makes you be able to open and close that shape. But overall, Jeremy's would have looked way more finished than mine would have, because I just spent too much time editing an aperture, you know, 50 times over and over and over again, and then you have to set up the math inside of that.
Yeah. So it can get complex, but we're going to show you at least a few simple ways to do a few simple ones in next time's class. So
I mean, if you're looking at the PowerPoint, we basically covered to slide 19, and then we're going to do 20 through 29 next time. And although that only seems like, you know, 9 slides isn't a bunch, expect for the next lesson to take at least an hour and a half.
yeah, because we're gonna import some sketches. We're going to build up some quick masses, and then we're going to create those components, and then we're going to export it into a project. So we're going to go through that whole process next class.
Yeah, this was basically showing you the meat of how the massing tools work. And this Thursday, not next Thursday. Where am I going? This Thursday, we're actually going to show you how those simple massing techniques can be used to start projects, basically.
Yeah. To take your sketch and start to model out some masses, and then bring those into different projects.
So we're going to go ahead and move on to questions.